He came in every morning before the city woke up. Black coffee, no sugar, and I was the quiet waitress he never truly understood. He looked powerful, but I could see the truth. His family empire was collapsing, his enemies were circling, and he had no idea the woman serving him coffee could save everything. They all laughed at the waitress, but they never checked her name. They never checked the trusts. They never checked who really owned the ground beneath their feet.
My Korean Mafia boss husband brought her home, thinking I'd stay silent forever. On moving day, he cried at my door for the first. He never cried for me. Not in 4 years of marriage. Not when I was sick. Not when I begged. Not even the night he brought another woman into our home. But the day I finally left, he cried at my door for the first time. And by then, it was already too late. 6 months ago, he brought her home. Soa, his first love. The woman his family always wanted. He sat her in my chair. He told me to make her comfortable, and his mother said the words out loud, so the whole house could hear. The help should know her place. They all thought I was nobody. A waitress he married in a weak moment. But I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I was never nobody. They just never bothered to check. 4 years ago, the Ryu Empire was dying. His enemies were circling. His accounts were frozen. His family was about to lose everything. And a quiet woman who served him coffee every morning had a secret she never told him. I came from old money he never knew about. I buried my name when my father died. I learned to disappear. And when I saw the man I loved drowning, I saved him. I poured my entire inheritance into rebuilding his empire, but I did it quietly. Through holding companies, through trusts, through structures only I control. The waitress they laughed at. She owned the ground they were standing on. They just didn't know it yet. Here's what's about to happen. Step 1. The betrayal that finally broke my silence. 6 months of watching him love someone else in the home I paid for. Step 2. The humiliation his family built, thinking I'd take it forever. The night they told me to serve the woman replacing me. Step 3 is where everything changes, because the papers in my hand prove the entire Ryu Empire was never really his. Step 4. The moment he realized he had thrown away the only person holding his whole world up. And Step 5. The moment I chose myself, walked away with everything, and never looked back. Stay. Because when he finally cried at my door, I want you to see his face. That face is the whole story. My name is Imani, and I need you to understand who Ji-hoon Ryu was to me before I tell you what he became. I met him in the worst year of my life. My father had just died, and the fortune he'd spent 40 years building was being torn apart by lawyers and cousins who smiled while they took everything. I watched my mother sign away our home. I watched our name disappear from the building it had been on for 30 years. So I did something nobody expected. I disappeared too. I took a different last name, moved to a city where no one knew me, and got a job as a waitress at a quiet coffee house on the 42nd floor of a building downtown, a building that, in another life, my father might have owned. That's where I met Ji-hoon. He came in every morning at 6 a.m., before the city woke up. Black coffee. No sugar. He always looked like a man carrying something too heavy to put down. I learned later what it was. His family's empire, the Ryu organization, old and feared, was collapsing under him. His father had left him debts and enemies in equal measure. He was 29 and watching everything his family built slip through his fingers. I didn't know any of that at first. I just knew he was tired, kind in a quiet way, and that he learned my name and said it like it mattered. One morning he didn't come in. A week passed. When he finally came back, he looked like a man who'd stopped sleeping entirely. "They're going to take it all," he said, almost to himself. "Everything my family built, and there's nothing I can do." And I made a decision that changed both our lives. I had buried my inheritance where no one could find it. My father, for all his mistakes, had hidden one thing well. A fortune in trusts and offshore accounts that the cousins never found. Money that was legally, quietly, completely mine. I had sworn I would never touch it. That money had a curse on it. It had torn my family apart. But I looked at this man drowning in front of me, and I thought, maybe money that destroyed one family could save another, so I told him the truth, part of it. "I can help you," I said. But you have to marry me first, and you can never ask where the money came from." He stared at me like I'd spoken a different language. "You're a waitress," he said. "I'm the woman who's going to save your empire," I said. "Take it or leave it." He took it. We were married 11 days later in a courthouse with 2 strangers as witnesses, and then I did exactly what I promised. I poured my entire inheritance into the dying Ryu Empire, but I did it through structures only I controlled. Holding companies, trusts, shell corporations layered so deep that on paper the Ryu organization belonged to a faceless investment group nobody could trace. That faceless group was me. Within 2 years, the empire wasn't just saved. It was bigger than it had ever been. And I want to be clear about what the Ryu Empire actually was, because company is too clean a word for it. The Ryus were old family. Power that goes back 3 generations, the kind that doesn't advertise. On paper, holding companies, real estate, shipping. Underneath, a council of 7 old men who'd run this city's shadows for decades. Black cars in every drive, rival families circling, and debts that didn't get settled in court. Not a corporation, a dynasty with a criminal spine. Ji-hoon became the most feared man in that world. His rivals stopped moving against him. His enemies bowed and his family bowed, and the whole city learned to say the Ryu name carefully. And the whole time, not one of them, not the council, not the rivals, not his own mother, knew that the quiet wife who never spoke at dinner was the secret identity holding the entire empire upright. They built a legend around Ji-hoon's comeback. The truth was sitting at the foot of the table, pouring the tea, saying nothing. I want to tell you that he loved me for it. For a while I believed he did. He learned to lower his voice when I was tired. He drove across the city himself. No driver, no guards, in the rain to bring me soup when I was sick. He held my hand at events and called me his wife in front of men who killed for less. That man existed. I'm not making him up to make the betrayal hurt worse. For the first 2 years, I let myself believe it was real. Small rituals that felt like proof. Sunday breakfasts, his head against my knee while he told me about his day in the low voice he used only for me. For an hour at a time, the most feared man in the city was just a husband in his kitchen. I gave that man my whole heart, my father's fortune, and every secret I'd spent years burying. I thought I was building a life. I didn't understand yet that I was building it on sand. And then his empire got big enough to be interesting again. And Sua Lim came back from overseas. Sua was his first love. His mother had chosen her for him when they were 19. Old family, right bloodline, the kind of woman the Ryu organization had always wanted at its center. They'd been together for 2 years before she left for Europe, and Ji-hoon went on to build his empire and marry me. When the empire was small and struggling, Sua stayed away. When it became one of the most powerful organizations in the country, she came home, and Ji-hoon's mother, Haija, welcomed her back like the prodigal daughter she'd always wanted. It started small. Sua at family dinners. Sua on Ji-hoon's arm at events I wasn't invited to. Sua's name in his mouth the way mine used to be. I noticed the small things first, because the small things are always where it starts. He stopped using the low voice with me. He started using it with her. He stopped finding me in the window seat on Sunday mornings. He started taking calls in another room. The breakfast ritual died so quietly. I couldn't tell you the last time we did it. One Sunday it just didn't happen, and then it never happened again. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being slowly replaced in your own life. It isn't loud, nobody announces it. You just start to feel like a guest in rooms you used to own, which in my case was a cruel kind of joke, because I did own them, every single one. I told myself I was imagining it. That's what they don't tell you about a marriage dying. It doesn't end with a slammed door. It ends with 1,000 small moments where you tell yourself you're imagining it. Then, 6 months ago, he brought her home. Not as a guest. He set her up in the east wing of the house I had paid for, in rooms with a view of the city my money built. He told me she was going through a hard time and needed family support. And his mother said it to my face, in the front hall, loud enough for the staff to hear. The help should know her place, make Miss Lim comfortable. The help. In a house I owned, in an empire I built. to a woman I had saved from ruin. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I had 4 years of practice keeping my face still. I went up to my room, and I opened the safe that Ji-hoon didn't know I knew the code to, and I took out the folder my lawyer Daniel Osi had kept airtight for 4 years. Every share, every asset, every building, every account, every piece of the empire routed through structures that trace back to one name. Mine. I sat on my bed and read it for the first time in 4 years, and then I made a phone call. "Daniel," I said, "it's time. I've been ready since the day you signed it," he said. I started packing that night. Quietly, one box at a time. It wasn't the clothes I cared about. It was the small things that proved what we'd been. The ticket stub from our first real date. The ring. I held each one for a moment, then put them in a box marked donate. What's not meant to be in your life will never belong to you. My father used to say that, before the money took him. I finally understood what he meant. Mrs. Park, who'd worked for the family for 20 years, stopped me in the hall, her eyes wide. "Madam," she whispered, "you can't just leave. You're the only good thing in this house." "I'm not leaving as the help, Mrs. Park," I said. "I'm leaving as the owner. They just don't know it yet." She didn't understand. She would, soon. Those last 3 weeks, they stopped hiding it, and I let them think I had nowhere to go. The first humiliation was the gala. The Ryu organization held a charity event every year, the kind of evening where the whole shadow world put on tuxedos and pretended to be respectable. Old family heads, the council, rival bosses under a one-night truce, 300 of the most powerful and dangerous people in the country in one ballroom. I had attended that gala on Ji-hoon's arm for 4 years. This year, I found out I wasn't going. From Suah, who told me while a stylist zipped her into a gown that cost more than most people make in a year. I went anyway, not on his arm. I drove myself, walked in alone in a plain black dress, and watched my husband cross the most dangerous room in the city with Su Og-ah on his arm and introduce her to the 7 old men of the family council, as if she were already his wife. One of them, old Chairman Go, who'd known Ji-hoon since he was a boy, saw me standing alone and raised his glass, a small, confused gesture. Ji-hoon caught it, and in front of the entire council, in front of 300 people who feared him, he turned his back on me and guided Suah toward the head table. My table, the one I'd sat at for 4 years. The whole room understood what they'd just watched. You don't get to the top of that world without reading a moment like that. The wife, discarded in public. The mistress, installed in front of witnesses. I stood at the edge of that ballroom and felt 300 sets of eyes slide over me with pity, and I did not let my face move. What none of them knew was that the real danger in that room had nothing to do with Suah. As I was leaving, a man I'd never met fell into step beside me near the coat room. Older, expensive suit, a scar along one knuckle. I knew the face from Daniel's files. Mr. Bake, head of the rival family to the south, the one that had spent years waiting for the Ryu Empire to show a crack. "You're the wife," he said quietly, not looking at me, "the one they're putting aside." He smiled at the room the way men in that world smile while they say dangerous things. When a house starts throwing away its own people, it means the house is weak, and weak houses get taken. He finally looked at me. "If you ever get tired of being thrown away, Mrs. Ryu, the Bake family has a long memory. Think about it. 2 of Ji-hoon's men appeared at the edge of my vision, black suits, hands folded, watching Bake with the stillness of men deciding whether tonight was the night. The air went tight. Bake tipped his head, smiled wider, and melted back into the crowd. That was the world I'd been holding up with my own 2 hands. Black cars in the drive every morning, silent men at every door, rival families circling, smelling the exact weakness Ji-hoon was creating by humiliating me in public. He thought he was just replacing a wife. He was showing his enemies a crack in the wall, and I was the only thing that had ever held that wall together. The second humiliation was the jewellery. My mother's emeralds, a set my father gave her on their wedding day, the last real piece of the Cole family I had left. I came back from packing one afternoon and Suah was wearing them. At dinner, in front of Ji-hoon and his mother, like they were hers. "They were just sitting in a drawer," Haija said when she saw my face. "And they suit Suah so much better. Don't make a scene over costume jewelry, dear. It's beneath even you. The last piece of my mother, on the neck of the woman replacing me, and I was told not to make a scene. I said nothing. But that night, I added one line to the instructions I was preparing for Daniel, one surgical line about the emeralds. They would come back to me. Everything would. If you've ever stood alone in a room where everyone watched you get replaced and kept your face perfectly still, drop your city. Below. Tell me where you're watching from. I need to know I'm not the only one who survived that. But it was the next thing that told me exactly how far Sua intended to go. She wasn't content to wear my jewelry and sit in my chair. She wanted my whole life erased and her own painted over it. While I was still in the house to watch, I came downstairs one morning to find her directing the staff like she'd run the house for years, having them take down the art I'd chosen and roll up the rugs. The master suite needs to be cleared by Friday, she was telling Mrs. Park. Repaint it, something brighter. Empty the closets completely. Donate whatever's left. She glanced at me without lowering her voice. Oh, good. You can help them decide what of yours is worth keeping. Though I can't imagine much of it is. Then she walked to the family portrait at the bottom of the stairs. Me beside Ji-hoon, taken 2 years into my marriage, and had a workman lift it down. This is coming down today, she said. We're sitting for a new one next week. The real family. She tilted her head at my face as it came off the wall. It would be strange to keep a picture of the help on the main staircase. She had them carry my portrait out to the same pile as the rugs and the donated clothes. I let her do it. Every wall she stripped, every order she gave. She thought she was erasing me. She had no idea she was just rearranging furniture in a house that belonged to me, ordering around staff whose paychecks I signed. The more completely she tried to erase me, the sweeter the moment was going to be when she learned whose house she'd been redecorating. The third humiliation was the papers. 2 days before moving day, Haija came to my room with a folder and 2 of the family's men standing behind her in the hall, the black-suited kind, who didn't speak. Divorce papers, she said, setting the folder on my desk. Sign them. You waive any claim to the family's assets. You take a small settlement and you disappear quietly. It's generous, considering you came into this family with nothing. They'd built a whole story into them. The gold-digger waitress who'd trapped a powerful man, signing away rights to an empire she'd supposedly never helped build. And if I don't sign, I asked. Haija smiled, and the 2 men in the hall shifted their weight, just slightly. A quiet threat, delivered the old family way. Nothing said. Everything understood. You will, she said. Women like you always understand where they stand eventually. I picked up the pen. I watched her eyes light up, and then I set it back down. I'll have my lawyer review it, I said. I'll give you my answer on moving day, in front of the family. She thought I was stalling, the last gasp of a powerless woman buying a few days of dignity. She had just scheduled her own undoing, and she walked out of my room smiling about it. Here's what made those 3 weeks unbearable, and I want you to feel it the way I did. Every single person in that house believed I was powerless. They looked at me serving coffee, packing boxes, keeping my head down, and saw exactly what they expected. A waitress who married up and was finally being put back in her place. And the whole time, I held a truth they couldn't see, and the not saying of it was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every cruelty they handed me, I absorbed, not because I was weak. Because I knew the longer they believed I was nothing, the more complete the reckoning would be when it came. Sua found me in the kitchen one afternoon wrapping dishes in paper. You can keep wrapping, she said, but these aren't yours to take. Nothing in this house is yours. I looked up at her, just for a second. You're right, I said. Nothing in this house is mine. She smiled, thinking she'd won. She didn't catch what I actually meant, that the house and everything in it belonged to a holding company, and I owned the holding company. She walked away believing she'd put me in my place, never knowing she'd just been handed a clue she was too arrogant to read. What I found out, in those 3 weeks, was that this wasn't just a man falling out of love. It was a plan. Daniel called me on a Tuesday. He'd been watching the legal filings, quiet movements in the background most people would never notice. "Imani," he said. "They're trying to push you out with nothing. Hija's been meeting with lawyers, preparing divorce papers that frame you as a gold digger who married Jihoon for his money. She's even telling people you signed a prenup giving up any claim to the empire." "Did I sign a prenup?" I asked. "You signed 43 documents that gave you controlling interest in everything they own," Daniel said. "No prenup. They invented one. There it was. The betrayal wasn't an accident of the heart. It was a strategy. They'd looked at the woman who saved them, decided she was disposable, and built a plan to erase her with nothing, never knowing she held the deed to their entire world. Sua was the bait, Hija was the architect, and Jihoon went along with all of it, because it was easier than seeing me. "What do you want to do?" Daniel asked. I looked out the window at the city, my city, in every way that mattered, even if no one knew it. "There's a board meeting in 3 weeks," I said. "The full reorganization vote. Every major asset on the table." "Yes, set it up," I said. "I'm going to walk in as the owner, and I'm going to let them find out who I am in the same room where they decided I was nothing." For 4 years I'd absorbed every blow in silence. Now it was time for the counterattack. And they wouldn't see it coming until it had already landed. I need to tell you about the porridge. When the Ryu Empire was still dying, when Jihoon couldn't sleep and couldn't eat from the stress, I used to make him a specific kind of porridge my grandmother taught me. Plain, warm, the kind of food that holds you together when nothing else can. I made it for him every night for a year, until his health came back and his empire stood on its feet. He used to say it was the only thing that made him feel safe. 2 weeks before I left, I came down to the kitchen at midnight and found him there. He hadn't seen me. He was standing at the stove, and he had a pot out, and he was staring at it like he couldn't remember how to begin. "I keep thinking there's something I'm supposed to make," he said when he finally noticed me. He looked confused, almost lost. "Some kind of food. I can't remember what it was, but I remember it mattered." I stood very still. "I don't know," I said. He nodded slowly, still staring at the empty pot. "It feels like I'm forgetting something important," he said. "Like there's a whole part of my life I stopped paying attention to." He didn't know it was me. He didn't know the porridge was mine, the safety was mine, the whole foundation under his feet was mine. He had forgotten me so completely that he was standing in my kitchen, in my house, trying to remember the woman right in front of him. That was the moment I knew I was really leaving, because you can survive a man who stops loving you. What you can't survive is a man who looks straight at you and can't remember that you were ever there. A few days later, I found the world's oakiest wife coffee cup in a box headed out of the house. I held it for a moment, the joke between 2 people who used to laugh. Then I threw it away myself. Some things you don't donate, some things you just let go. The night before I left, Mrs. Park told me something I didn't know. We were in the kitchen. The staff had gathered quietly to say goodbye, even though they weren't supposed to. And Mrs. Park, who had served the Ryu family for 20 years, sat me down and told me what those 4 years had actually looked like from the outside. "You don't know," she said, "how many times you saved this family without anyone seeing." And she listed them. The night a rival organization moved against Jihoon, and an anonymous investor froze their assets overnight, ending the threat before it began. That was me. The licensing crisis that nearly shut the empire down resolved in 48 hours. That was me. Daniel made the calls. The year Jihoon's mother got sick and the best specialist in the country suddenly took her case for free. That was me too. I never told a soul. Every time this family was about to fall, Mrs. Park said, something saved them, and nobody ever asked what. They just thought they were lucky. She looked at me. "It was never luck, was it, madam?" "No," I said quietly. "It was never luck. For 4 years, I had carried this entire family on my back. I had saved the man who forgot me, protected the mother who called me the help, and quietly funded the empire that was now trying to throw me out with nothing. I had done it all in silence, because I loved him, and because some part of me believed that if I gave enough, he would finally see me. He never did. And that was the lesson I had to learn the hard way. You cannot earn your way into being seen by someone who has decided not to look. So I stopped trying to be seen, and I started preparing to be undeniable. There's one more thing I need you to know before moving day. I have a sister. Her name is Amara. She's 26, and she is the one part of my life the Ryu family never touched, because I never let them. When my father died and the cousins came for everything, Amara was the one they tried to use. Young, trusting, easy to manipulate. They nearly destroyed her, getting to the last of the family money. I got her out, moved her overseas under a different name, paid for her degree, gave her a quiet life where no one from the old world could find her. I never told Ji-hoon she existed, because the first rule I learned the year my family fell apart was this: the people you love are the leverage your enemies use against you. The Ryu organization was full of enemies, and Ji-hoon's mother was the most dangerous of all. So I kept the one person I had left completely off their map. No photos, no mention, no trace. Every month, the same anonymous structure that held the empire also quietly funded the thing Amara and I had built together. A foundation in our father's name. The kind of clean work he'd never gotten to do because the money ate him before he could. Scholarships. A legal aid fund for families being torn apart by inheritance vultures. The exact thing that had happened to us. Amara ran it from overseas. I funded it from the shadows. The Ryu family was preparing to throw me out with nothing, building a story about a worthless gold digger who'd contributed nothing and deserved nothing. They had no idea that the woman they were erasing had a sister, a fortune, a foundation, and the deed to their entire world, all hidden in plain sight, all built while they looked the other way. The waitress they laughed at had a secret identity stacked 3 levels deep, and on moving day it was all about to come out at once. Comment the word undeniable if you've ever decided to stop begging to be seen and started building something they couldn't ignore. Tell me. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Moving day came on a grey morning with rain against the tall windows. I had timed it carefully. The movers arrived at 9 a.m. The family council and the full board of the Ryu organization were meeting at 11. The reorganization vote, every major asset on the table, the most important meeting of the year. And I had made sure through Daniel that the whole family would be at the house that morning to see me off. Before they left for it, they thought they were watching me get thrown out. They were about to watch the owner collect what was hers. Sua was there in a cream dress, standing by the grand staircase with her arms crossed like she already lived there. My emeralds still around her neck. Haya sat in the front parlour with her tea, watching the movers carry my boxes with cold satisfaction. 2 of the family's men stood by the door in their black suits, and Ji-hoon stood near the window, not quite looking at me, the way he'd stopped looking at me months ago. Make sure she doesn't take anything that isn't hers, Haija told the head of security. She came into this family with nothing. She leaves with nothing. She set the divorce papers on the hall table beside me. Your answer. Sign and go. I picked up the pen, and then, for the second time, I set it down. I'll give you my answer at the meeting, I said. The 11 o'clock. I'll see you all there. Haija actually laughed. You're not invited to the meeting. You've never been invited to a meeting. You don't even understand what we do in those rooms. I understand more than you think, I said, and I picked up my coat. 11 o'clock. Don't start without me. I arrived at the Ryu Tower at 10:55. A building, though none of them knew it, that I owned outright. The security guard at the executive elevator stopped me. He was new. He didn't know my face. I'm sorry, ma'am. This floor is restricted. The board is in session. You'll have to leave. My name's on the building, I said quietly. He smiled the way you smile at someone who's confused. Ma'am, I really can't. Daniel stepped up beside me and handed the guard a single sheet of paper. The guard read it. I watched his face change. I watched him read it again. And then, very carefully, he stepped aside and pressed the button to open the elevator himself. My apologies, he said, and his voice had changed completely. Miss Cole. The boardroom doors opened and I walked in. The whole world was in that room. The 7 old men of the family council along one wall. The board members around the long table. Hija at one end, mid-sentence, freezing when she saw me. Sasa beside her, my emeralds at her throat, and Ji-hoon at the head of the table, rising halfway out of his chair. "This is a closed meeting," one of the council members snapped. "Who let her?" "Sit down, Chairman, go," I said. "You're about to find out who you actually work for." Daniel set the portfolio on the table and opened it. 4 years ago, I said, walking slowly down the length of the table, this organization was dying. The debts were going to bury you. The Bakes and the Cho family were circling, waiting to carve up what was left. The council was 3 weeks from losing everything 3 generations of you built. I stopped at the center of the room, and then an anonymous investment group appeared out of nowhere, paid the debts, froze the rivals' assets overnight, rebuilt the entire empire in 2 years. You all wondered who. You decided it didn't matter, as long as the money came. I looked around at the 7 old men who had run this city's shadows their whole lives. "It was me," I said. "It was always me." Sua laughed, a thin, nervous sound now. "You? A waitress?" "I was never a waitress." I let the words land. My father was Augustine Cole. Some of you in this room did business with him before his family was torn apart by the same kind of vultures sitting at this table. I buried his name when he died. I buried his fortune where no one could find it. I looked at Ji-hoon, and when I found a man I loved drowning, I used every last cent of the Cole fortune to save him, quietly, through structures only I control. I nodded to Daniel, and he laid the controlling interest documents down the center of the table, one after another, in front of every board member. "Let me make this simple," I said, "so no one in this room has to read the fine print. The house Ji-hoon told me to leave? Mine. The tower you're sitting in right now? Mine. The cars in the garage, the accounts you thought Ji-hoon controlled, every asset on the table for today's vote, all of it traces back to one name, mine. I have owned all of it the entire time you called me the help." The boardroom went completely silent. And then something happened that I will remember for the rest of my life. Chairman Go, the oldest man on the council, the one who'd told me to sit down, slowly pushed back his chair and stood up. He was 80 years old. He had not stood for anyone in 30 years, and he inclined his head toward me, the old family gesture of respect to the person who holds true power. One by one, the rest of the council stood. Then the board, old men who had run this city's shadows their whole lives, rising to their feet for the woman they'd spent 4 years stepping over. Hija's teacup rattled against its saucer. Sua's smile died on her face, my emeralds still glinting at her throat. And Ji-hoon stared at the documents, then at the standing room, like a man watching the floor disappear beneath his feet. "That's not possible," Hija whispered. "It's all properly filed, witnessed, and irreversible," Daniel said. "As of 4 years ago, this vote and every vote is hers to decide. Without her signature, nothing moves. She holds controlling interest in the entire Ryu organization." The silence was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I watched understanding move across their faces one by one. Hija, who had spent 4 years looking at me like a stain on her family, now looking at me like she was seeing me for the very first time, which I suppose she was. Sua, slowly reaching up to touch the emeralds at her throat. Understanding at last whose they really were, whose chair she'd been sitting in, whose life she'd been trying on. And in the doorway, Mrs. Park, who'd ridden up with me, one hand over her mouth and the faintest smile underneath it, because she'd always known. She was the only one who'd ever really seen me, and now she got to watch the whole room catch up. Ji-hoon finally spoke. His voice was barely there. "Imani," he said, "why didn't you tell me?" And there it was, the question that contained the whole tragedy. "Because you stopped asking," I said. "You stopped asking me anything 4 years ago. You looked straight at me and forgot I was there. You brought her into our home and told me to serve her. Your mother called me the help on a floor I owned, and not one of you ever wondered if the woman you were erasing might be the one thing holding your entire world up." I closed the portfolio. "I saved you," I said. "I asked for nothing but to be seen, and you couldn't even do that." I turned and walked out of that boardroom, past the men still on their feet, and I did not look back. He came to the house that evening. The movers had finished. My boxes were gone. The rooms I'd lived in for 4 years were bare, and I was standing in the doorway with my coat on and my keys in my hand, taking one last look at a house that never really been a home. I heard the car, no driver, no guards, just him. He came up the front steps in the rain, and when he reached the door, the cold Mafia boss the whole city feared was gone. What was left was just a man who had finally understood the size of what he'd thrown away. And then Ji-hoon broke. He dropped to his knees on the marble, at the threshold, in the rain, and he reached for the hem of my coat, and he cried. For the first time in our entire marriage, Ji-hoon Ryu cried for me. "Don't go," he said, and his voice cracked open. "Imani, please. I see you. I see you now. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. Please don't go." I looked down at him. I'd waited 4 years to see this man cry for me. I used to imagine it would feel like winning. It just felt quiet and a little bit sad. "You see me now," I said softly, "because I'm finally taking something back. That's not love, Ji-hoon. That's loss. You never cried for me when I was giving. You only cried when I stopped." "I can change," he said. "Give me a chance. One chance." "You had 4 years of chances," I said. "I gave you every single one." I stepped around him, walked down the steps into the rain, and got into my car. In the mirror, I could see him, still kneeling at the door of the empty house, crying at my door for the first time, on the last day it would ever be mine to leave. I want to tell you what happened in the months after, because this is where it stops being about him and starts being about me. Once the room knew who I was, the vote was a formality. I exercised my controlling interest in the Ryu organization and did 3 things. First, I removed Haija from every position she held. The woman who called me the help was escorted out of the building by the same security she used to command. The face slap landed in total silence. No shouting, just a signed document and a door closing behind her. Second, I dissolved the arrangement that brought Suar into my home. She'd moved through the world believing she'd won a powerful man and his empire. She walked out with exactly what she'd contributed. Nothing. The other woman got the ending she'd written for me. Emeralds returned to my hand-on, the way out. Third, and most important, I pulled my family's name back out of the shadows. Augustine Cole went back on the building it should have always been on. The fortune that once tore my family apart became the foundation of something. I built clean, on my own terms, with my own name on it. I didn't destroy June. I could have left him with nothing. The same nothing he and his mother had planned for me. But I didn't. I left him the empire I'd built, minus the pieces that were mine, and just enough of a stake to keep standing. Not because he deserved mercy, because karma doesn't need me to be cruel. He'd spend the rest of his life running an empire he now knew he'd never truly built, remembering the woman who held it all up while he looked the other way. That's a heavier sentence than ruin. I moved into a home with my name on the deed and the Ryu name nowhere on it, and I brought Amara home, out of hiding, out of the false name, back into the light I'd kept her in the shadows to protect. For the first time since our father died, my sister and I sat in a room that belonged to us, under our own name, with no one circling. And here's the part I didn't expect, the part that wasn't about revenge at all. I came back to life. For 4 years I had made myself smaller and smaller, folding myself down to fit the space they left me, until I'd almost forgotten what I looked like at full size. When I stopped, when I finally stood up to my real height, I didn't just get my fortune back. I got me back. I built the foundation in my father's name into something real. Scholarships. A legal aid fund for families being torn apart by inheritance vultures. The exact thing that had happened to us. Amara ran it beside me in the open, under our own name. People who'd known me as the quiet wife didn't recognize me. Not because I looked different, because I finally looked like myself. That's the real glow-up nobody photographs. It isn't a new dress or a new face. It's a woman remembering her own size. The waitress they laughed at walked away with everything. Not because she took it. Because she'd built it, quietly, year after year, while they were all looking at someone else. 6 months later, Ji-hoon asked to see me one time. I almost said no. But there are some conversations you owe yourself just to close the door all the way. We met in a quiet cafe, Not the one where we'd met. I made sure of that. He looked different, not ruined. Just smaller, like a man who'd finally understood the size of what he'd thrown away. I spent a long time, he said, trying to figure out when I stopped seeing you. I let that sit. It wasn't one moment, I said. It was 1,000 small ones. Every time you chose her voice over mine. Every time you let your mother decide what I was worth. Every time you walked past me in a house I was holding up with my own 2 hands. I'm sorry, he said, and I believed him. For whatever it was worth. I know, I said. Was any of it real, he asked. The way you saved me, the way you stayed. Did you ever love me? I thought about it honestly. I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone, I said. That's why it took 4 years. You don't pour your whole life into saving a man you don't love. I picked up my coat. But I learned something, Ji-hoon. Love isn't supposed to be a thing you bleed for in silence, hoping someone notices. The right person doesn't need you to disappear to make room for them. The right person makes room for you. I stood up. You wanted me to stay silent forever, I said. And I almost did. That's the part I'll never get back. The years I spent making myself small so you... Do you have room to grow? I looked at him one last time. But I'm done being silent, and I'm done being small. I walked out of that cafe into a city that had my father's name back on its skyline, with a sister waiting at home who would never have to disappear again. And I didn't look back. Here is what 4 years of silence taught me. A man who can look straight at you and forget you're there has already told you everything you need to know. You don't have to wait for him to bring another woman home. The forgetting is the betrayal. Everything after is just the proof. I used to believe that if I gave enough, if I saved him, funded him, protected him, carried him, he would finally see my worth. But you cannot earn your way into beings by someone who has decided not to look. And you should never have to. Your worth was never the thing you could give someone. Your worth is yours. It doesn't disappear when they stop noticing it. It doesn't shrink to fit the space they leave you. And the day you stop begging to be seen and start building something undeniable, that's the day everything changes. She walked away with everything, not because she took it, because it was always hers. The fortune, the name, the strength, the sister she saved, the future. She just spent 4 years letting other people convince her it wasn't. The moment she remembered it was, she won. And here is the part no one tells you. The sweetest revenge was never the empty house, or the mother removed, or the other woman left with nothing. The sweetest revenge was walking out that door, into her own name, on her own terms, and realizing she didn't need a single one of them to be whole. That's not a revenge story. That's a homecoming. The difference is everything. Question before you go. If you could go back and tell the version of yourself who stayed silent 1 single sentence, what would you say to her? Put it in the comments. I need to read everyone.